Husband always hid his wife's shed. After his funeral, she entered and panicked. Sarah Thompson held the rusty key between her trembling fingers, still unable to believe what she had found hidden in Richard's suit pocket. During 30 years of marriage, she had never questioned the absolute ban on entering the old shed at the back of their property in Arlington. 3 days had passed since her husband's funeral, and she still felt the emptiness echoing through the house. Richard had always been a reserved man, but affectionate in his own way. He worked as an accountant at a construction company and never showed interest in art or any hands-on activities. So when he said the shed was just a storage space for old tools and that she didn't need to worry about it, Sarah never pressed further. Now, standing before the heavy wooden door, she felt a mix of curiosity and dread. What had Richard kept there so carefully? Were they just memories of a past he preferred to keep hidden, or maybe a hobby he was too ashamed to share? The lock resisted for a few seconds, but finally gave way with a dry click. When the door opened, the first smell that hit her was fresh paint. That confused her. Who could have been in there? Did a neighbor have access to the shed? Sarah hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. Light filtered through small, dusty windows, creating golden beams that cut through the dimness. What she saw made her clutch her chest, her heart racing. The walls were covered in dozens of paintings, all draped in white sheets like ghosts suspended in mid-air. The floor was clean, organized, as if someone tended to the space regularly. There were easels, brushes neatly arranged in jars, and tubes of paint laid out in an order that revealed the care of whoever used them. With shaking hands, Sarah approached the first covered painting. The sheet slid off smoothly, revealing something that made her stumble back. It was her own face, painted with striking precision, dated 20 years earlier. She remembered that day when she had cut her hair short for the first time, against Richard's wishes. "My God," she whispered, bringing a hand to her lips. The second painting showed an afternoon when she had cried in the garden after an argument with her mother. Richard had left for work that morning, and she was certain he hadn't seen her. How could he have known about such an intimate moment? One by one, the sheets were removed, unveiling a gallery of moments she barely remembered living. There was the exact instant she discovered she was pregnant, with that shy smile as she looked at the test. The afternoon she planted roses in the garden, her hands dirty with soil and her hair tied up haphazardly. And the moment she lost the baby, silent tears streaming down her face. Each canvas was a window into her own life, seen through Richard's eyes. The precision of the details unsettled her. How had he captured not just her appearance, but the emotions she carried in each moment? Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot, as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Sarah noticed a small staircase at the back of the shed, leading to a loft she hadn't seen before. She climbed slowly, gripping the wooden railing that creaked under her touch. Up there, she found even more surprises. An old desk was covered in papers, and as she approached, she saw they were letters. Hundreds of letters addressed to her, all written in Richard's careful handwriting, but never sent. Her hands trembled as she picked up the first one. "My dear Sarah," the letter dated 5 years ago began, "today you looked beautiful tending to the plants on the porch. I wanted to tell you, but the words wouldn't come. So I'm writing them here, hoping one day I'll find the courage to say what I feel." Another, more recent letter revealed something that made her sink heavily into a nearby chair. "Sarah, I need to tell you something I've been hiding for 15 years. I'm slowly losing my sight. I can't read like I used to, and colors are becoming harder to distinguish. I'm afraid to tell you because I don't want to be a burden. But these paintings are my way of preserving every moment before the darkness comes." Tears began rolling down Sarah's face. 15 years. Richard had hidden this from her for 15 years. How had she not noticed? Now she understood why he always asked her to read the bills aloud, claiming he'd forgotten his glasses. Why he watched her so intently, as if memorizing every detail of her face. A noise from the lower part of the shed startled her. Footsteps approached, and she heard a familiar voice. "Sarah, are you there?" It was Margaret, Richard's sister-in-law and her best friend. Sarah hurried downstairs, wiping her tears. "Margaret, you scared me. How did you know I was here? The older woman with graying hair and gentle eyes took a deep breath before answering. I helped Richard keep this secret, Sarah. He made me promise never to tell. You knew. Sarah's voice came out louder than she intended. You knew he was losing his sight and didn't tell me. He begged me not to. He said you'd already suffered so much when you lost the baby and didn't want to be another weight on your shoulders. Margaret walked over to one of the canvases, lightly touching the frame. I came here twice a week. Brought him special paints, the ones he couldn't buy himself anymore. When his vision got worse, I described the colors for him. Margaret, he'd say, I need to know the exact shade of the blue dress Sarah wore yesterday. I can't paint it wrong. Sarah felt a mix of gratitude and betrayal. On one hand, Margaret had helped Richard keep his passion for art alive. On the other, they had both conspired to hide something so important from her. But why didn't he ever tell me he painted? I would have supported him. I would have helped. Because he was ashamed, Margaret explained, sitting on a wooden stool. Richard always thought of himself as an ordinary man, no special talents. He started painting by chance when his vision began failing. It was like he wanted to hold on to the world before it disappeared forever. Margaret opened a drawer and pulled out a thick notebook. He wrote everything down here, every shade of color, every expression of yours he wanted to remember. Look. Sarah flipped through the notebook, seeing pages and pages of detailed notes. Sarah laughed this morning when the cat jumped on the kitchen table. Her eyes sparkled like chestnuts in the sun. She's worried about something. There's a small crease between her eyebrows when she's thinking. He watched you all the time, Margaret continued, not intrusively, but with the love of someone who knows time is precious. Every brush stroke was a prayer, every color a way of saying, I love you. Just then the shed door opened again, and a familiar figure stepped in. It was Mrs. Eleanor, the elderly neighbor who had lived next door for over 20 years. Sorry to intrude, but I saw movement and wanted to check if everything was all right. Sarah wiped her eyes and motioned for her to come closer. Mrs. Eleanor, did you know about all of this? The white-haired woman looked around with a wistful smile. Yes, dear. Richard came to me many times over the years, especially in the last few months when his vision was very poor. He would ask me to describe the colors of the sunset because he wanted to paint your favorite moment in the garden. Mrs. Eleanor pointed to a canvas in the corner, still covered by a sheet. That one there was the last he made. He spent weeks asking me to describe the exact shades of the sky at that time you used to sit on the porch. Sarah uncovered the canvas slowly. It was a painting of their garden in the late afternoon, with two empty chairs side by side waiting for them. The colors were perfect, as if Richard could still see every nuance. He also sold some paintings, Mrs. Eleanor continued. Not many, and always anonymously. He used the money to pay for an experimental treatment he was doing in secret. What treatment? Sarah asked, surprised. Some eye injections, down in New York City. He went every week, telling you he had work meetings. He spent everything he earned from the paintings trying to regain some of his sight. The weight of the revelation hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. Richard had fought alone against his failing vision, spending his savings on treatments, selling his art to fund the hope of continuing to see her face. Why didn't he tell me? Sarah asked, more to herself than to the others. Because he loved you too much to watch you suffer with him, Margaret answered, placing a hand on her friend's shoulder. Richard was always like that. He'd rather carry the burden alone than share the pain with those he loved. Mrs. Eleanor walked over to a shelf Sarah hadn't noticed before. There are more things here you need to see. Among brushes and paint jars was a small wooden box. Inside, Sarah found cassette tapes, all numbered and dated. There was also an old tape recorder still working. He recorded descriptions of how you looked each day, Margaret explained, so he could paint even when he couldn't see you clearly anymore. Listen to one. Sarah inserted the first tape and pressed play. Richard's voice, still strong and tender, filled the room. Today is March 15th, 2023. Sarah is wearing the yellow dress I gave her for her birthday. She smiled when she saw I remembered to buy sweet bread for breakfast. Her eyes are bright today. Like when we were young, I want to paint this moment, this simple joy of an ordinary morning. Tears streamed down her face again, But this time, they were different. Not tears of sadness, but of a deep and astonishing love. Richard had found a way to immortalize not just her appearance, but also the small moments that made life worth living. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Sarah spent the rest of the afternoon listening to the tapes and examining each painting. There were hundreds of them, arranged chronologically, telling the story of 30 years of marriage through the eyes of a man who had loved her deeply. By evening, when Margaret and Mrs. Eleanor had already left, Sarah found something that made her sink to the floor, her legs giving way. In a dimly lit corner of the room was a larger canvas, covered by a different, newer sheet. When she removed it, she saw it was an unfinished painting. Half of it showed her face, painted with the mastery Richard had developed over the years. The other half was blank, but there were detailed instructions stuck to the canvas. Sarah read a note in Richard's shaky handwriting. "If you're reading this, it means I'm already gone. This painting is for you to finish. I couldn't complete it because I wanted you to be part of the creation. In the desk drawer, you'll find everything you need to continue." Sarah opened the indicated drawer and found brushes of various sizes, paints neatly organized by color, and a manual Richard had written especially for her. "How to Paint with Love," it said on the cover in his handwriting. The manual began, "Sarah, you always said you didn't know how to paint, but love doesn't need technique. It only needs heart. Finish this painting when you feel ready. There's no rush. You have a lifetime to learn to see beauty the way I did." On the following pages, Richard had drawn simple diagrams explaining how to mix colors, how to hold the brush, how to give movement to the strokes. It was as if he were right there beside her, patiently teaching her how to turn feelings into art. Sarah closed the manual and looked again at the unfinished painting. She could almost hear Richard's voice. "Don't be afraid, my dear. Art isn't about perfection, it's about love." The days that followed were an emotional roller coaster. Sarah spent hours in the shed, uncovering new details about Richard's secret life. She found receipts for painting lessons he took on Saturdays when he claimed to be playing dominoes with friends. There were also notes on special techniques for visually impaired artists, methods he had developed to keep creating even as his sight severely declined. In one of the drawers, she discovered letters from art galleries in New York City, interested in buying his work. Richard had refused them all, saying his paintings weren't for sale, but for love. Only a few had ever been sold, always anonymously, to cover his treatments. A week later, Sarah received an unexpected visit. Michael, the couple's son who lived in Chicago, had returned home after the funeral. He knocked on the shed door, where Sarah now spent most of her time. "Mum, can I come in?" Michael was a 40-year-old man, an engineer like his father, but with his mother's open temperament. When he saw the shed, his reaction wasn't what Sarah had expected. "You knew?" she asked, noticing the lack of surprise on her son's face. "I did, Mum. Dad told me about 5 years ago when his vision got much worse. He made me promise not to tell you." Sarah felt a pang of disappointment mixed with understanding. "I helped him organize the shed whenever I visited. I thought I was protecting you, Mom. Dad said you'd already suffered enough in life and didn't want to be another burden." Michael walked up to one of the paintings, gently touching the frame. He showed me every piece, told me the story behind each one. "You were the inspiration for all his art, Mom. Every brushstroke was a declaration of love." Sarah hugged her son, feeling for the first time since Richard's passing that she wasn't completely alone in the world. "There's something you haven't seen yet," Michael said, leading her to a corner of the shed she hadn't fully explored. There, hidden among the shelves, was a small safe. Michael entered a combination and opened it. Inside was enough money for Sarah to live comfortably for years. "Dad saved every penny for decades," Michael explained. "Part of his salary, the money from the paintings he sold, all to make sure you'd be okay after he was gone." Sarah looked at the money, but that wasn't what moved her. Alongside the bills was an envelope with her name. Inside, one last letter from Richard. "Sarah, if you're reading this, It means I kept my secret until the end. It wasn't easy hiding something so important from you, but I needed to spare you the pain I was feeling. Every day I spent losing my sight was also a day I found a new way to love you. When I could no longer see colors clearly, I learned to see beauty in your voice. When I could no longer make out your face distinctly, I learned to memorize every expression, every smile, every tear. These paintings are my way of saying you were the most beautiful thing my eyes ever beheld. And even when they closed forever, my heart kept painting you onto my soul. Use the money I left to be happy. Travel, buy beautiful things, do everything you've ever wanted to do. But if you ever wish to honor me, finish the painting I left incomplete. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be done with love. Yours forever, Richard. That night, Sarah slept in the shed for the first time, wrapped in a blanket that smelled of paint and memories. She felt Richard's presence there, as if he were right beside her, whispering words of encouragement. The next morning, she received another visitor. This time it was Dr. Lawrence, the physician who had cared for Richard in his final years. He came to the house in person, bringing information Sarah needed to hear. "Mrs. Thompson, I needed to speak with you about your husband's treatment." They sat on the porch, where they used to have coffee together every morning. "Richard had been coming to me for over 10 years, Dr. Lawrence continued. He had progressive retinal degeneration, a hereditary condition that would inevitably lead to total blindness." "He could have told me," Sarah murmured. "I said that to him many times." But Richard was stubborn. He refused several aggressive treatments that might have slowed the disease's progression. He didn't want to spend your money or worry you with something that had no cure. Dr. Lawrence pulled an envelope from his pocket. "He asked me to give you this after he passed. It's the results of all the tests he took over the years. He wanted you to know he fought, but in his own way, quietly." Sarah tucked the envelope away without opening it. She'd already uncovered too much about Richard's secrets. She needed time to process everything. The following weeks were a period of discovery and reflection. Sarah began visiting the shed daily, not just to admire the paintings, but to understand the man she had lived with for 30 years. She found journals he had kept, written in handwriting that grew increasingly shaky as his vision worsened. The entries revealed not only his struggle with blindness, but also his deep devotion to her. "Today, Sarah made that cornbread cake I love so much," one entry read. "I couldn't see her clearly, but from the sound of her voice I know she was happy. I need to paint that happiness before I forget how it sounds." A more recent entry, written in trembling script, said, "Sarah asked today if I was okay. I almost told her everything, but I saw that worried glint in her eyes and couldn't bring myself to do it. I'd rather carry this burden alone than watch her suffer with me." Sarah began to realize Richard's secrecy wasn't betrayal. It was the greatest act of love he could offer. He had turned his limitation into art, his pain into beauty, his fear into creation. She decided it was time to honor his memory in a unique way. Simply keeping the paintings or finishing the incomplete one wasn't enough. She wanted Richard's legacy to touch others. First, she went to Mrs. Eleanor, who had become a confidant in recent days. "Mrs. Eleanor, I want to turn the shed into something special, something Richard would be proud of." The neighbor smiled, as if she already knew what Sarah was thinking. "You want to open a studio, don't you?" "More than that," Sarah replied. "I want to create a space where people with visual impairments can learn to paint, using the techniques Richard developed." The idea took shape in the weeks that followed. Sarah sought out organizations that worked with visually impaired individuals, spoke with art teachers, and studied adapted teaching methods. She discovered there was an entire community of artists who, like Richard, had lost their sight, but not their passion for art. They had developed techniques using textures, three-dimensional shapes, and a keen perception of colors through touch and memory. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. Michael fully supported his mother's idea. He volunteered to help with the bureaucratic and financial aspects of the project. Margaret, who had grown even closer to Sarah since discovering the warehouse, offered to be the first volunteer assistant. Richard would be so happy knowing his art is inspiring others. Margaret said as they organized the materials. The first student at the studio was Jason, a 12-year-old boy who had lost his sight in an accident 6 months earlier. His mother, Jennifer, had reached out to Sarah after hearing about the project through a local association. "My son always loved to draw," Jennifer explained, tears in her eyes. "After the accident, he doesn't want to do anything anymore. He says he can't see the colors." Sarah knelt in front of Jason, remembering Richard's words about seeing with the heart. "Jason, can you tell me what your favorite color used to be?" "Blue," the boy whispered. "Blue like the sky." "And do you remember what blue is like?" Sarah asked. "Yes." "Then you can still paint blue. Because color isn't in the eyes. It's in the memory and the heart." Sarah picked up a brush and guided Jason's hand to the canvas. Following the techniques Richard had developed, she taught the boy to feel the texture of the paint, sense the resistance of the brush, and create shapes using senses beyond sight. When Jason made his first brushstroke, a timid smile appeared on his face. It was the first time he had smiled since the accident. "I can feel the color," he said, amazed. In the weeks that followed, more students began to arrive. There was Mrs. Martha, a 60-year-old woman losing her vision due to diabetes. There was also Brandon, a 25-year-old young man diagnosed with a degenerative disease. Each of them brought their own story, their own pain, but also their own determination. Sarah realized that teaching art to visually impaired individuals wasn't just about technique. It was about hope. She used Richard's tapes as inspiration, listening to his descriptions and adapting them for the exercises. "Today we'll paint the sound of rain," she would say, remembering how Richard described the different textures of rainy days. The studio became a place of healing for everyone involved. Sarah found a new purpose in life, and the students discovered that art could exist far beyond sight. 3 months after opening the studio, Sarah finally felt ready to complete Richard's unfinished painting. She had learned so much about art during that time, not just from the manual he left behind, but also from teaching others. One quiet afternoon, after all the students had left, Sarah sat before the canvas that had waited for her all these months. She picked up the brush with hands that still trembled, but now from emotion, not fear. Following Richard's instructions, she began to complete her own portrait on the canvas. Every brushstroke was a conversation with her husband. Every color she chose was an answer to his words of love. As she neared the end, she realized she didn't just want to finish the painting as Richard had planned. She wanted to add something of her own, something that represented everything she had learned about him after his passing. Carefully, she painted the shadow of a second figure beside her own. It wasn't exactly Richard's face, but his presence, his essence, as if he were always there by her side even when she could no longer see him. When she finished, Sarah stepped back from the canvas and smiled. For the first time in months, she felt Richard would be proud of her. The next day, she received an unexpected visitor. It was a journalist from the local paper who had heard about the studio and wanted to write a story about the project. "Mrs. Thompson, this story is incredible," the journalist said, looking at the paintings displayed in the workshop. "What inspired you to create this space?" Sarah glanced around, seeing her students' works displayed alongside Richard's paintings. Each one told a different story, but they all spoke of the same thing, the human ability to find beauty, even in darkness. "My husband taught me that art isn't about what we see, but what we feel," she replied. "He spent years painting my image, but he was really painting our love." The article was published the following week, bringing even more students to the studio. People from other cities began visiting Arlington specifically to see the work being done there. Sarah realized the project had grown beyond her expectations. She started receiving invitations to give talks about inclusive art, and even universities expressed interest in studying the techniques Richard had developed. But the most special moment came 6 months later, when Jason brought his first finished painting. It was a simple piece, showing a house with a garden, but made with so much love that it seemed to glow. "Mrs. Thompson, I painted my home. I can't see it, but I remember every detail. And when I paint, it's like I'm seeing it again." Sarah hugged the boy, feeling Richard would be smiling at that moment. The first anniversary of Richard's passing was marked by a special exhibition at the studio. All his paintings were displayed alongside the students' works. The entire Arlington community came to learn the story of the man who had transformed his loss into art. Michael came from Chicago just for the event, bringing his wife and children. Margaret organized a special coffee gathering with all the treats Richard had loved. Mrs. Eleanor shared stories about how he would ask her to describe the colors of the sunset. But the most emotional moment came when Sarah revealed the completed painting. The image of her and Richard, united by art and love, brought tears to everyone's eyes. "He wasn't just painting my face," Sarah told the audience. "He was painting our story. And now, through all of you, that story continues." After the event, when everyone had left, Sarah remained alone in the workshop. She walked among the paintings, gently touching each frame, remembering the moments they represented. She stopped in front of the painting she had completed, gazing at the two figures who seemed to converse across the canvas. "I did it, Richard," she murmured. "I turned your secret into something beautiful. I hope you're proud." That night, Sarah dreamed of Richard for the first time since his passing. He was in the workshop, painting a new canvas, but this time she could see what he was creating. It was an image of the studio filled with students, all painting with smiles on their faces. "You've done more than I ever imagined possible," he said in the dream. "You turned my loneliness into community, my pain into hope." When she woke, Sarah knew she had found her new purpose in life. It wasn't just about keeping Richard's memory alive. It was about continuing his mission to show that art can exist even in darkness. 2 years later, the studio had become a national reference for teaching art to the visually impaired. Sarah had written a book about the techniques developed by Richard, and the project had expanded to other cities. But what made her proudest wasn't the awards or the recognition. It was seeing Jason, now 14 years old, teaching other boys how to paint. It was seeing Mrs. Martha displaying her canvases in a local gallery. It was seeing Brandon selling his artwork to help keep the studio running. Every student who passed through the workshop carried with them not just knowledge about art, but also the certainty that beauty can be found even in the hardest of times. Sarah had learned that Richard's secret wasn't just about hiding his condition. It was about protecting the love they shared, turning limitations into creation, turning goodbyes into eternity. The workshop, once a place of secrets, had become a place of revelations. Revelations about the strength of love, about the human capacity to overcome adversity, about art as a way to connect people. And every morning, when Sarah opened the studio doors to welcome her students, she felt Richard's presence there, not as a shadow of the past, but as a light that continued to guide the way. The paintings on the walls were no longer just memories of a man who loved his wife. They were symbols of hope for everyone who believed that art can exist beyond sight, that love can transcend separation, that beauty can be found even in darkness. Richard had hidden the workshop for 30 years to protect Sarah from pain. But paradoxically, by revealing his secret, he had given her the greatest gift of her life, the chance to turn suffering into art, loneliness into community, farewell into continuity. And so, the workshop that once held secrets now spread light, proving that true love doesn't end with departure. It transforms into a legacy, into inspiration, into hope for all who believe beauty can be felt far beyond what the eyes can see. The end of the story. Now tell us what you thought of this touching story and where you're watching from. Richard proved that true love finds ways to endure even in the face of the greatest challenges. Do you think Sarah made the right decision by turning the workshop into a studio? Share your honest thoughts in the comments below. We love reading every message. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other heartwarming stories like this one.